It's not just in the UK that we're seeing this sort of rhetoric. The European Parliament is also coming out and having some strong words against the UK.
Yes, that's true. So, I mean, this is a political row, and there's a row going on here about whether Brexit should be happening and what the nature of Brexit is. Part of the problem that the British government has got is that it's playing to two different audiences. It's at once trying to conduct a negotiation in Brussels, in which it's sort of being, its message is we are good partners, you can trust us, and it's also trying to keep its own MPs, its own members of Parliament, on board back in London, and they want to hear something different. So what David Davis did was, having sort of finally got this agreement very early on Friday morning, late on Thursday night, to move to the next phase of talks, there was some disquiet among a lot of Conservative MPs who are quite Euro-hostile as to what exactly had been agreed. And David Davis helpfully went on television on Sunday morning and said, well, you know, this isn't a legally binding agreement, this is a sort of a starting point. And what of course happens is people in Europe can speak English, and they can see these things thanks to the internet, and they say, well, hang on a second, we've just had a big battle nailing down the language on this, and now you're saying you're flexible on it. So there's a diplomatic problem here, and Davis has essentially had to row all the way back and say, well, it's not legally binding, but obviously I do consider myself bound by it.
Well, to give just a sense of the response from the European Parliament, the parliamentarian who I understand is responsible for Brexit came out with a tweet, actually, taking on Mr. Davis, saying, after David Davis's MP's unacceptable remarks, it's time the UK government restores trust, which sounds like things aren't going very well. But let's be frank, does the European Parliament have a whole lot to do with this negotiation anyway?
Not a whole lot, but they do have something to do with it. And remember, there are 27 other countries involved in this. So that chap, Guy Verhofstadt, he is grandstanding too. We've got to be clear, both sides are doing politics. And you can see people sort of making public statements because they play well with their domestic audiences, and there's a bit of that going on. But the most important counterparties in this are the European Commission, but the European Parliament does get to sign off the deal, so they're not completely ignorable. I think that a lot of this is what we would call a storm in a teacup. It's sort of not. It's important, but it's not that important so long as you can keep the overall deal moving. But on the other hand, if you want to look for signs that the British government isn't always handling this terribly well, then the fact that the Brexit secretary is having to go on Twitter to explain that he didn't really mean the thing that he said on the BBC on Sunday morning, you know, that's a sign you could look for.